looks like we're ready to get started. Once again, my name is Ian with UDA Technologies, and I'm here to take you through the QuickBooks integration webinar today. Our focus today, of course, is going to be how ConstructionSuite is able to send information and pull information from QuickBooks, and we'll be taking a look at all the different applications in ConstructionSuite that take advantage of this. Job costing is obviously going to be a big component of this. A lot of contact information being shared back and forth is going to be also available. We'll take a brief look at application for payments and how change orders work with that and everything like that. And we'll actually wrap with one of the newer features today, which is going to be the work in progress report. This you can probably see right here from the main today page in ConstructionSuite. Up here next to the dashboard panel, there's the work in progress, and we'll be filling out the information and talking about that here at the end as well. Now, to get started, what we're looking at right now is the main dashboard for ConstructionSuite. When you first log in, it will take you right to this page, and what you can see from this page is a lot of the information that we built yesterday from the estimating portion in ConstructionSuite, which is going to show us our cost breakdown. Monday, of course, a couple of days ago, we talked about the overview webinar, which discussed a lot of the information for leads as well, or contact information here. This is where you can see the lead pipeline details. And we even created a couple of change orders yesterday as well, which would be showing up here. Today, our focus is going to be more geared towards the financial aspect, and therefore the financial graph is going to be one that we're populating pretty heavily. Now, on this financial graph itself that you guys are looking at right now, we've got 5 overall measurements that we're looking at here. The first one is the base estimate. It's represented by the red bar in the graph, and you can see that down here at the bottom as well. The base estimate is going to be your original contract sum. This should be showing us everything that shows up in the original contract. And once again, it's not going to have applied to it any change orders or any adjustments or anything like that. Those all factor into the estimated value, or the green bar on the graph. So estimated value is going to take the base estimate, and it's going to go up and down based on any positive or negative change orders that we have available in ConstructionSuite's estimate. As these get sent over to QuickBooks, we'll take a look at how it's going to create those subjobs and everything like that for it there. But this is just your immediate representation that yes, in fact, the change order costs or the change orders that are being applied and accepted may impact the overall contract value or the base value for this job. Now, the next 3 are typically values that we're pulling in from QuickBooks. Actual costs, which include all bills, checks, credit card transactions, and payroll, is going to be represented here by the blue bar on the graph. Committed costs, which are typically going to be the purchase orders that are available in QuickBooks, are going to be represented by the yellow bar. And of course, our last but favorite of the lot is the invoiced amounts, representing how much we've charged our clients for these jobs. And this is going to be the orange bar in the graph that you'll see here. So it's always nice to see that one when it gets up to and possibly exceeds our estimated value. But as long as we're keeping track of these things, it should always match up at the end of the job, and we should be in good shape. Now again, most of this information is just as an overview. If you hover over any of these bars in the graph, it'll show you the actual dollar amount that is representing here, and you can get a good visual on the graph itself. But the information itself is best found from the projects in the primary estimate on the job. Now, to get into one of these projects in ConstructionSuite, we'll need to move over to the navigation panel on the left side, and you'll actually see the area marked projects right here. If we click into the project section, this is going to give us a listing of all the jobs that we have available. And if we pick one of these projects, you'll be able to hop into and take a look at all the different information that's available for the job itself. This is going to include all the different estimates that we might have set up, different schedules, could be files, could be documents, just about any general information you'll actually see in here. And as you go navigating through all of the additional projects in here too, you'll see where the file set can become a little bit large. Some of these jobs have just a few files, others have many files, and you can always go through and see all of the documentation that you need there. What we're looking for today, though, is always going to be the primary estimate on the job, and it's represented today by the little green dot that I have on the icon. This is my primary estimate, and when we open up the primary estimate, it's going to show us a lot of the details that we've put together from yesterday's webinar for pricing out these jobs. Now, it looks like we've already taken a little bit of a head start on pulling in actual costs, so I'm going to hide that for a moment, going down to the standard view. And this is going to give me just a handful of columns that we'll be taking a look at to begin with. Now, as we talked about yesterday, most of the information that we're looking at to go over to QuickBooks is going to happen right here. There is an option in the estimate itself to start sending and receiving details over between ConstructionSuite and QuickBooks, and it all takes place up here at the top in the QuickBooks Integration tab. Now from this tab, you'll actually have a few options here to get started. Now our first option for getting started is going to be here in the QuickBooks Initial Setup. This QuickBooks Initial Setup is a one-time process that you'll typically go through when you're first running ConstructionSuite to integrate with QuickBooks. When you actually open up the QuickBooks Initial Setup, it's going to guide us through selecting a series of universal settings for how ConstructionSuite is going to be sending information to QuickBooks. How we need to populate the chart of accounts, how we're going to be populating the items list, and how we're going to be looking for the information when it comes time to import it back into ConstructionSuite. Now from here, on this very first page, we have a couple of options on how we typically do business. If your accounting is done as cost of goods sold, meaning everything that you purchase is immediately turned around and sold to the client, or you charge the client for everything that you buy, then you can set up COGS accounts, and selecting this top option is going to set the defaults through the rest of this wizard for that type of work. The other type is construction work in progress, and is a lot more common for people who are actually building homes and then selling off the completed project. This is going to be construction work in progress, and what they do is they typically have asset accounts and liability accounts as opposed to COGS, which is cost of goods sold accounts, versus income accounts. So if you choose the construction work in progress style, this is going to give you a different set of accounts, although the item level generally isn't touched on this. Now, of course, the options that we're selecting here are going to be detailed a little bit better underneath here, but these are just setting a few defaults. If you go with the custom option, or if you decide to select one of these and then change some of the options later, there's not going to be a problem with this. So for now, I'll just continue on through with the cost of goods sold. And we'll go to the next screen, which is the chart of accounts, or the expense accounts specifically. So with each of the items that we have to buy for doing any type of project, there are typically going to be two accounts associated with them. There is going to be the outgoing account, which is all the funds that we are paying for these items, and then there would be an incoming account that is going to show up later. That's your income. This is what you make because you purchased this item. So with that being said, we're looking at the set for outgoing accounts here, and there's a few different selections that you guys will be able to make. Under the chart of accounts detail, this is where you're telling ConstructionSuite what the accounts need to be labeled in order to send them over to QuickBooks successfully. Now we have to use information available from within the ConstructionSuite estimate in order to make this possible. And it starts with either using a single account, or one of the three options that we have here is a single account, using an account for each category in ConstructionSuite's estimate, like planning, foundation, and framing, or going all the way down to the category and subcategory level of detail. If we choose this last option, you're going to have a new account show up for every single subcategory we can see here on the project totals page, which means that you'll have many, many accounts. The categories as accounts is going to be slightly less. You'll just see them for the tabs basically along the bottom. Using a single account means that you're just setting it all up to go into one single, in my case, job costs account here. Now this is going to be heavily dependent on how you as a bookkeeper or company owner prefer to see the information showing up for you. Or perhaps this is going to be based on the accountant's preference as well. This can always be changed once it gets over to QuickBooks. What we're doing here is just saying to ConstructionSuite, if in doubt, use job costs. Now, the next section aside to the side of this is the account type. And as I mentioned earlier, if you choose COGS account, then this account type is typically going to be something like expense or cost of goods sold, depending on the selections that we've made previously. If you choose the construction work in progress, I believe that it usually starts off as another current asset. But there's several account types here, and again, check with your bookkeeper or your accountant on which ones you should set up or which ones you should be using here. On the next page, we're going to actually take a look through the item level of detail here. And with the item level of detail, this is where you can choose how ConstructionSuite is going to populate the items list. This is the important part of the QuickBooks integration. The accounts can always be changed later. The item names these cannot be changed once they get to QuickBooks. The reason that I mention this and the reason that we stress this as an importance is ConstructionSuite and QuickBooks need to use the same item names in order for them to understand one another. In this case, I'm selecting the option to send over an item into the QuickBooks items list for every category and subcategory. Your options around this, of course, are going to be creating an item for each category, just like we had previously, or creating an item for every single entry that you have in the estimate. There are many camps on preferences for how to set up the item level of detail in QuickBooks. We're giving you the 3 most popular, and there are various benefits to each of these that we choose. For example, if you select to send over just the categories to QuickBooks as items, then this is going to summarize all the detail that we have laid out here under the planning category as one total dollar amount, $105,008, and it's going to show up under a single line item called planning. This is a fine option if you guys use all subcontractors for your labor, and you don't have to separate out, or you don't need to get into the nitty-gritty details for what comprises planning or foundation or framing or anything like that later, because it's not going to create 5 different items for planning labor and planning materials and planning subcontractor costs or anything like that. It's just one. So it rolls it up into a single total, and planning would only have one account associated with it in that respect. It keeps the items list simple, but it also makes job costing a little bit more difficult because you don't know how much you've spent on any individual subcategory or line item here. Now, the second option is creating your categories and subcategories as items in the QuickBooks items list. This tends to be the most common option that I see available because you're getting into a little bit more detail. You can see how much you've spent on design services versus how much you projected to spend, or how much you made on site work as opposed to how much you spent perhaps. And this is, granted, it's a little bit more summarized, but you're still getting enough detail that you can kind of see where you can start to break things apart and get better use out of these. Option number 3 involves sending over a new item for every category, subcategory, and item when it gets to QuickBooks. Again, pros and cons available to you here. Obviously, when you're generating your job costing reports, you will be able to see down to the penny how much you have spent on all the nails that you have used on this job. Can be extremely useful. It will, however, create hundreds and hundreds of items for an estimate this size in QuickBooks. And I don't see very many bookkeepers that like to navigate through an items list that large. So typically what we're looking at here is there's going to be a compromise. As you're talking to the bookkeepers, or you the estimators and you the bookkeepers, you guys will need to get together and you'll need to figure out how much detail that you need for this, and then go ahead and set it up so that ConstructionSuite sends over that level of detail. That being said, you can always start at a lower level of detail and move up to a greater level of detail just by adding to the items list. So if you wanted to start with categories and eventually move up to using categories and subcategories, that's great. You cannot, though, go to the highest level of detail and step down easily, because once the items are created in QuickBooks, they are there. They're in QuickBooks. They exist. Changing this setting isn't going to go through and remove them. Keep that in mind as you're going through this process. Now, warning's done on that one. Let's move on to the item type. In this drop-down, we have a few different types of items. We've got service items, we've got non-inventory parts, inventory parts, and other charges. The service items are the only ones here that can actually show up on any kind of payrolls or paychecks. If you guys do QuickBooks payroll, it's important to use service items there. If you select this item type, it cannot be changed in QuickBooks. The inventory parts, similarly, are important if you guys are doing any kind of inventory tracking in QuickBooks. If you're doing the inventory tracking, items that are set up as inventory parts will allow you to keep tabs on their inventory as you go. Also, cannot be changed when it gets to QuickBooks. If you start something off as an inventory part, it will always be an inventory part. Now, the third option here, the one sandwiched in between these two, is a non-inventory part. These are things that you go to the store, you purchase, you bring it to the job site, you use it, it's done. This is an item type that can be changed in QuickBooks, so some of the items can become service items, others can become inventory parts, but in general, they're going to stay typically as non-inventory parts. If in doubt, I typically recommend using service items. This is kind of a catch-all. There's no downside to setting these things up as service items aside from the fact that you can't then keep inventory for them. If you guys don't keep inventory, and there's a chance that you might eventually use QuickBooks Payroll, service is the way to go. On the next page, we're setting up the income account. We typically just give you one, something like UDA construction payments or something like that. And if you can, of course, choose which type of income account or revenue account it's going to be. If you're using typical COGS accounting, it's just going to be income. If you guys are using WIP accounting, it's typically going to be another current liability. Once you have this home and it's just sitting on the lot until somebody moves in or buys it from you, it is a liability. It can only depreciate, and that's why it shows up as this particular revenue type. So we've got those selections made. We come back to the last page, which is your review page, and we can always go through at this point and verify that we have recently backed up QuickBooks before hitting finish. So check the box and then click finish and we're good to go. Now we will always prompt you to make sure that you've backed up QuickBooks, because if there have been any changes, this is going to impact the lists that we have in QuickBooks moving forward. We don't want this to be a surprise to anybody involved. So if you've got a backup, you can always roll back. If you don't get backups, then you would have to manually clean up those lists. Tedious, not a fan. Always create the backups. It's usually a good call. Now, let's take a look at what this can do now that we've got it set up to do something. When we're looking at the estimates in ConstructionSuite, there's a great amount of detail that we have in here, like we were talking about before: categories, subcategories, types, methods, prices, so on and so forth. The information that shows up in line here in the estimates is going to be available to you here. And from within any of these category sheets, as we mentioned, you'll see things like the subcategory design services. Under design services, we've got plans and design services. And this has a cost associated with it. It's going to be the cost to me, and a price associated with it, which is typically the price to my client. As you get to the end of this, there's also going to be a company overhead margin, which will typically show an overhead, a profit margin, contingencies, and some of my clients will use things like insurance might show up on that last page, or sales tax or something like that as well. This you can all put onto the company overhead margin sheet because it calculates as a global percentage of the entire project. Now, of course, what this means is you've got a couple of numbers that you're going to be juggling here when you're getting ready to send it over to QuickBooks. We have estimated costs, we have total costs, we have total prices, we have price with overheads and markups and everything like that. And when you go to select the option to create a QuickBooks estimate, which is always going to be your starting point once you get a contract signed, this is going to make sure that you're including all of the right details when it sends over. So again, I'm sending over everything at the project totals level, meaning that I only want to see categories and subcategories show up in my items list. This is where we can verify that we're going to the correct job. You can choose to include the company overhead margin at this point. And from here, we can either prorate it into everything else, basically distribute it so that it's spread out evenly across the job, or we can keep it as a separate line item. I prefer the latter option because as a separate line item, I can always see that I'm making my profit on these jobs. If something individually goes over the original cost or the original estimated value for these, I'll immediately know it. I'm not trying to cushion or buffer the numbers or anything like that. I want raw numbers so that, I want the estimated cost to go along with this so that I will know how accurate I am at estimating, or how accurate my estimators are, or whoever's doing this work. So don't pad your numbers because you think you might be off. Try to keep on it as much as possible because that's going to give you the most value out of these reports so that your estimators can get better at their jobs. Now, the last options that we have here are for line item markups and taxes. The line item markup is typically something that I will leave in place if we're going over to QuickBooks with line item markups. If you use them, generally speaking, you need to have them, so you might as well leave them. Tax, on the other hand, we calculate tax a little bit different in ConstructionSuite than they do in QuickBooks. In QuickBooks, tax is always at the bottom line. In ConstructionSuite, tax is always in line. Because it's different, I usually set up my QuickBooks items to have tax types associated with them, which means I don't want to send over my taxes from here. We've got the right numbers, but the tax values would be doubled up if we clicked OK. So keep that in mind. Set up your taxes in QuickBooks so that QuickBooks can manage tax properly. go ahead and use your taxes in ConstructionSuite as well so that your contract values are right, but you don't have to send it over because then you're going to be double dipping in the tax game. And from there we can click OK, and over she goes. And now we have an estimate. Now once again, what you might have noticed at that point is ConstructionSuite verified that we had all of the details that we needed for the entire estimate. First of all, we created the customer in QuickBooks, and if we switch over to QuickBooks at this point, save and close, you will see Alice Gorey is our customer. She already existed, so we didn't have to create that as a new customer. Instead, we had to create the project, Lot 185 Baldwin Park. Now, once we have the project in place under Alice Gorey, we can then create the estimate, the transaction itself. But in order to populate this, we need to make sure that we have the items. Now, in order to generate the items, we have to make sure that we have the accounts. So the first step that ConstructionSuite goes to once the job is created is it will verify that we have all the right accounts in place. Then it'll verify that we have all the right items in place, and then we will take those items and we will use them to populate the estimate. And here is the resulting transaction. Now this all happened with ConstructionSuite managing the data entry and everything like that. So I got my QuickBooks estimate by clicking just a few buttons in ConstructionSuite. All of the detail for the entire estimate is going to show up here now, and there's no double entry required. I don't have to go back through and verify the numbers or anything like that. This is going to be a complete estimate package, and now I can just save it and close, and we are ready to begin billing against this job, or more importantly, we're also ready to start charging the client. So if we go back to ConstructionSuite and take a look at some of the additional options that we have here, you'll see that in addition to creating a QuickBooks estimate, we can also create invoices, purchase orders, credit memos, and, because they're also estimates as well, whenever we accept a change order, it's going to go over to QuickBooks as a sub-job. So let's take a look to see if I actually have a change order. I know I do someplace. So let's scroll through the estimate, and here's one under Windows. So in this particular change order, I've got a $1,200 change order for Windows. Now, when we have the right column set open, in this case I'm looking for status, you'll see that there is a change order status associated with this particular line. And when we actually go into the change order and mark it as accepted, it will prompt us to send this change order over to QuickBooks as well. This is going to function a lot like creating the QuickBooks estimate. In this case, we're creating a job, which is a sub-job to our primary, which is a subset to Alice Gorey. Alice Gorey is the client, the job is Lot 185 Baldwin Park, and this is sub-job called Change Order 1. When we get over to QuickBooks, it will actually be indicated as a sub-job, and you will see it now slightly below and indented underneath the primary project, Lot 185 Baldwin Park. This is so that you can always look at the customer list in QuickBooks and know exactly which change orders have been accepted right here in line. This is also going to create an estimate which contains only the change order items associated with it, because those are what should be showing up on the contract that we signed for this change order. Have a change order contract signed, it includes this Windows item for $1,200, and here's the full estimate for that. Now, it's a great way to keep up with all the detail for your change orders, and everything that we set up that goes into this change order subjob now does roll up in all the reports that we generate in QuickBooks into Lot 185 Baldwin Park. So you don't have to be concerned that the bills are going to show up on different reports or anything like that. They won't. Your estimate versus actuals in QuickBooks will always just roll it up into the total, and you'll be in great shape. Now, along those lines, there's going to be a couple of different ways that you can create bills in QuickBooks as well. Now, the most straightforward way in QuickBooks to do this is to come up to the Vendor Center, hit Enter Bills, manually type in all the items that you want for the bill. Again, I'm not a big fan of this because it involves a lot of manual data entry. I prefer to use creating the QuickBooks purchase orders right here from ConstructionSuite and then flipping the switch to turn the PO into a bill. This can be done pretty easily by clicking the Create QuickBooks Purchase Order option and then applying a few filters to what we need to pull out of the estimate. If you're going through the estimate and you're assigning resources throughout the estimate, like Ajax Supply is going to be the supplier for all of our overhead doors and installation, then you can simply filter by resource and pick Ajax from the drop-down list here. It looks like in this case we haven't gone through and done our work setting up all of those resources, so instead let's come into and select the exterior windows and doors section. Where did I put that? Yeah, exterior windows and doors. And then here we could actually pick overhead doors and installation. There we go. If this is going to be showing up on our purchase order, then of course we want to make sure that we select the vendor that we're going to be purchasing this from. Click OK, and it'll go over to QuickBooks as a PO. Now, for those of you who are not currently using the purchase order system in QuickBooks, this is not a problem. The main reason why I recommend turning it on and using this application is now we have, in essence, the vendor's version of an estimate that we can easily flip into the invoice that they would be sending to you, which in QuickBooks we treat as our bill. So now we have the purchase order available for Ajax Supply. When we come in to enter bills, we can choose any of a number of different purchase orders to apply on this bill that we're receiving from them, including, there it is, our overhead doors and installation. Now you might notice that on this bill, which is a little different than the invoices that we normally set up for our clients in QuickBooks, on this bill we've got items that span a couple of different jobs. Here's the Dean residence, here's lot 185 Baldwin Park. We've got a couple of different classes and things like that associated with it, but the important thing here is that we've got all the items that we expect to have, and we've got the costs associated with them as well. So this is how much we should be paying Ajax Supply. And the other primary benefit to sending over your POs into QuickBooks is whoever is accepting these invoices and putting them into QuickBooks can immediately now recognize if an item went to the wrong job site, if we're being billed for something that we didn't order, perhaps, or if the quantities on these things are just wildly off. If we notice that some of these changes or adjustments are not to our benefit, it's an immediate red flag that we can then go in and revisit that invoice or contact the vendor and make sure that they didn't mix anything up. Now, this doesn't mean that the prices are always going to be exact. You can always come into these and adjust the prices a little bit after the fact if you need to. This is going to become important because once this information is pulled back into ConstructionSuite from QuickBooks, we will be able to see now how far over budget we've gone. So let's head back to the project totals page. And under the import from QuickBooks option, we have an option here to import our actual costs. Now, once again, these actual costs could be checks, bills, credit card charges, and paychecks. So just check anything that you would like to apply here. There's also a couple of different options for picking just paid bills or unpaid bills, printed checks, which are like paid checks, or unprinted checks. So go through and select the options that you want from here and click OK. Now you may notice that there's another option down here as well to generate a custom transaction detail report in QuickBooks. If you check this option, it's going to go out and pull all of the items that show up on any of these transaction types and give them to you in a nice clean report, so you could then go in QuickBooks and see if you have any discrepancies. This becomes extremely important if you import invoiced amounts or import actual costs or something like that, and you notice that there is a large chunk at the bottom of unclassified QuickBooks expenses. If you ever see that, just import your actuals again and check this box to generate that report. You can then do a side-by-side comparison between your estimate and your report in QuickBooks, just to make sure that you guys didn't go through and use an item that doesn't exist anywhere in ConstructionSuite or something like that. Now, when you do import your actual costs and you come back to the project totals page, you'll actually see now where we're showing you a remaining balance, in essence, for all the different line items that we've selected. And here you can notice on the overhead doors and installation, I've got that $300 actual that we put onto the bill, which does mean that we are over budget. $833 over budget. This isn't exactly ideal, but we've got enough time now to catch this. Maybe make up a little bit of money from the contingency fund, or find out maybe if there was something on that bill that was just mistagged or mislabeled. If not, we still have the quick and easy depiction showing us that we are over budget. Now, once again, this all takes place through the estimates in ConstructionSuite. You open up the estimate, we can create invoices, purchase orders, estimates, change orders, credit memos, what have you. Credit memo, by the way, is just a negative change order. So if a client decides that initially they wanted, let's go down to plumbing systems. So originally they've got the water service that we're going to be installing. If they decide that they're going to get somebody else to do this, we might issue a credit memo for $11.44. This is just going to be a change order that we put in for the same line item, water service, and just mark it as a negative $11.44 for the cost and send it over to QuickBooks as a credit memo. If you do this, please make sure that you bill for the water service at the same time that you issue the credit memo. I say this because I've seen a couple of clients in the past issue a credit memo for something without treating it as the refund that it really is. So if in doubt, just remember that a credit memo is the same thing as a refund on something. You don't want to refund somebody unless you've already taken their money. Otherwise, you're just giving away free money. And I've got a number that you can call. By the way, it's my cell phone. Just reach me afterwards and I'll give it to you. Now again, all of this information is going to be sent over to QuickBooks as invoices, POs, estimates, credit memos, change orders, what have you. We're pulling back a lot of similar information here in actual costs, committed costs, and invoiced amounts. And as I mentioned, when we save this, it's going to be populating the financial graph, but it's also going to be available to us when we generate some of the additional financial reports here in ConstructionSuite as well. Now, when we take a look through the financial reports that are going to be available here in the estimate, you're going to notice a lot of common reports like estimate versus actuals reports or estimate versus invoiced amounts to show what you expected to make versus what you've made so far. Profitability reports are along the same vein, and we've also got things like over budget and remaining balance reports in here as well. All of these are going to be most useful when you start importing the information back from QuickBooks so that you can parse through the information here for these reports. You'll also see the details showing up here in the estimate proper as well. And this means that the information that we're pulling in is now available to people who work with ConstructionSuite but never with QuickBooks. So the bookkeeper can actually pull in all the actual costs and start spitting out some of these reports, or import the actual costs and save the estimate and let your project managers pull up their own reports. These reports are, of course, going to be generating in OnPoint. So the very first thing that it's going to do is it's going to open up OnPoint. It's going to ask what you would like to include in this report itself. And then when you click OK, it'll generate it for you in OnPoint as well. And there's a variety of different options that you can include. You can say that we want to take a look at everything that we have marked as an option, just in case the client decides to later accept these. There might be sections in here that have no value or have no actual costs that we might want to include because we know that we're going to be billing on them shortly, and that maybe just needs to show up in the report. And you can also do things like include line item notes or footers or something like that as well. I'll just try to keep it semi-simple. And when you take a look at the information here, your results will show up in one of these OnPoint documents like so. Now because of the settings that I chose here, I'm getting mostly summarized information, and I'm getting far more information than would really typically be useful in this particular style of work. I just selected to include everything, so it's showing me more than I would ever need. And yeah, keep in mind that the purpose of the reports that we're generating here is not to show you everything necessarily. If you need to see everything, take a look at the estimate. You'll get a little bit more benefit out of these if you go through and take a look for just the information that's different or unique. So if I were looking at an over budget report, that might be a little bit more useful for me in this case, because then it would extract this overhead doors and installation and maybe anything else that I might have overbilled already, which doesn't look like there's much. But it would give me just these key points to take a look at and maybe question with the site supers or whoever is managing these projects. So once again, don't try to use these reports to pull out everything from the estimate. If you want everything, just look at the estimate. The estimate already has everything. Use these reports to pull out the significant information for that feature, that facet. So keep that in mind as well. Now, of course, we're talking about generating reports, and the next report that I'd like to take a look at isn't in the estimate at all. It's actually the WIP report that we have built into ConstructionSuite, which is going to help you stay on cost or on budget with most of your projects as a whole. So at this point, we've put some information into this estimate, we've saved the details, we've imported some actual costs and things like that, and we can come back and take a look now at this information showing up not just back on the Today screen in the financial graph, but also on the work in progress report. This work in progress report is going to show us a lot of similar information to this based on what we've put together just now in ConstructionSuite and QuickBooks, or across several of our jobs. Ultimately, what we're looking at here in the the work in progress report, or the WIP summary report here, is up at the top, we've got a breakdown of profitability and costs based on the jobs that I have available in the report itself, which you can see located down here. What this means is we've got a couple of different graphs, or a couple of different measurements here, which should help us determine how much we have left in billable profit, how profitable our jobs are right now, any slippage and grippage percentages that we have in here. Slippage, of course, being we have gone over budget, grippage being we've come in under budget and we're complete on these tasks, and so on. And all of this is going to be pulled based on the estimates that we've pulled up or drawn up in ConstructionSuite, and the QuickBooks integration, where we've been paying bills and sending out invoices and so on and so forth. So again, that information is going to be taken and put into the report down here, where you'll see things like, under the Dean residence, my original contract price, keyword being price there, meaning that we're charging the client this much, is going to be $502,000, almost $503,000. Our current contract price is $503 as well, because we have 0 change orders. Now over on the cost side, the job itself is going to cost us about $412,000. Again, no change orders, so that the current job cost budget is still $412,000. This means that, of course, the contract price is going to be plus company overhead and margin, whereas the original job cost is going to be without that, which is where the discrepancy of $90,000 plus or minus some change comes into play. So again, original contract price is base estimate. Original job cost budget it's our expected cost for this job. The current contract price is estimated value, and the current job cost is estimated value minus company overhead margin or markups. Now, next up, of course, we've got the actual cost to date. This is pretty straightforward. These are the actual costs that we've imported from QuickBooks. And the remaining job cost budget is pretty direct. It's current job cost minus actual cost gives us remaining job cost. Now there's a line next to this for the estimated cost to complete. In an ideal world, these numbers should always be identical. But because this isn't an ideal world, there might be need to change some of these, so you can click on this value and put in an updated number that you think might be coming into this instead. So if you think that it's going to be about $20,000 more than this, then you can always come in here and say, no, it's not going to be $338, it's going to be $358, $420 and 50 cents, which is going to update the rest of the numbers as well and impact our profitability. But you can put in those numbers here and get some good, solid numbers from that. Now, from here, of course, you're going to have the best estimate of job costs. This is going to be an updated value now because we've got an estimated cost to complete, plus our actual costs is going to give us this new best estimated cost. So this is obviously going to be a little different now that we've changed the estimated cost to complete. Of course, the original estimated gross profit is pretty straightforward. That's our markups. From change orders, we still have nothing, but now we've got an estimated final gross product that is $20,000 less, again, because we're projecting to spend 20 grand more on the job than we thought. And there's no change orders, so we can't account for that 20 grand. It's just going to have to be a hit to our gross profit. Nobody likes that, but there it is. So from here, you'll also notice that we have some additional percentages, some additional figures to show us our original estimated gross profit. Our original profitability on this job was going to be about 18%. Now, because of the 20 grand hit, it's about 14%, and this means that we have slipped almost 5% on the job. And we've slipped this 5%, and we're only 17% done on this project. So, bit of a bad sign, something for us to keep up with immediately, because these numbers, again, in a perfect world, if our estimators are amazing with numbers, these percentages are always going to be relatively low. I'd say comfortably within about 2%. So you'll see those there. And then from here, of course, we've got some additional details, some additional numbers for you to go through and take a look at, like earned gross profit is how much money we should have made at this point, and cost plus gross profit is how far along in the job we should be. Then we've got some unbilled revenue, we've got remaining contract values, and so on. There's also going to be a little area here for you to keep track of your backlog. Backlog is always important, so keep up with that here. And then completion date is actually pulling from the schedule. Once again, since we've put together the schedules in ConstructionSuite, the work in progress report is going to be giving us that date here. If it needs to be changed, much like the estimated cost to complete, you can click into this cell and make some adjustments to the schedule accordingly. Now, of course, all this information is going to come together in the total line at the bottom, representing the total that we have in projects going right now. Typically, the work in progress report will only contain projects that are actually underway right now. Otherwise, we're just kind of padding these bottom line numbers with projects that we either haven't started yet or jobs that are already complete. So by all means, go through and filter this list down a little bit, remove the ones that don't apply, and so on. You'll also be able to come through and take snapshots of this work in progress report at any time as well. You can generate new snapshots, or if you manage your snapshots, this is going to be saved copies that are occurring at an automatic basis. So you can always go through here and define how often you want to keep these snapshots and just set it up so that it's constantly remembering to take a snapshot maybe once a week or once every couple of weeks or once a month or something like that. So you can always go back and compare your progress from period to period. You'll also be able to do things like print this off or export it to Excel just in case you want to make some adjustments to this. For some of our new sponsorees that we have out there, our newest one is Remodeler's Advantage. They have a specific format that they request from a lot of their members, and this is going to closely match that. We're actually building in the capabilities to match it to yours as well. So if you have another organization that you're a member of and they require something like this, and they have a very special format that they like, let us know. Give us a call, and we can always build that into it as well, or we can work with you on how to get it set up yourselves as well. And along with that, we've got things like the total lines, which you can turn on and off, of course. You can print the document out, like we said, and there's a couple of options on what you pick and choose to go along with this. Now, this does lead into a couple of the new options that we have in ConstructionSuite 6, like the ability to say that your project is not started but incomplete as of yet, or that it's a completed project, and you'll see these applying here. You can also pick your time frames or your length for the schedules and your revenue range as well for these jobs that you want to show in the report. So if you're a company that has two types of projects that you do, the quick and easy inexpensive jobs and the more expensive lengthier jobs, you can differentiate between these by setting up limits. Maybe we won't put a job on here unless it's more than 16 weeks. On the flip side, you can also do it by cost. I don't want anything to show up on here if it's less than, $170,000. You can always come in here, by the way, and type into these too, so you don't have to struggle with the slide bar if you don't want to. But doing something like that allows you to get a cleaner, smaller list instead of looking at all these short, sweet projects as well, or the $0 projects that we're still in the process of setting up. So once again, plenty of options to go through and revise this report, and this should always do a great job of giving you an accurate running total of where you stand on all of your jobs based on a lot of the details that are coming in from QuickBooks. Now, this is, like I said, this is one of the handful of reports that are required for some of our clients. Some of you may also be working with one last tool that's required of you from banks or from architects, and this is the application for payment. So if we come back to the estimate, and you want to take a look at generating one of these AIA G702 and G703 package forms, then you'll need to come back to the estimate and go to the QuickBooks Integration tab, and you'll see the option to do so right here for the application for payment. Now, this application for payment is a subset of the QuickBooks integration. We populate most of the information on the schedule of values from information that's in QuickBooks, and this is primarily to make sure that your books match what the bank has on file for your company. So we always want those to line up, and therefore we require that you put this into your bookkeeping tool, which in this case is QuickBooks. Now, this starts with estimates in QuickBooks. The estimate is where the original scheduled value comes from, and if we come take a look at this job, we now have two estimates available. We have one for the primary job, estimate number 18, and then we've got one for the change order that I've sent over as well, which is 19. That's all I have for this job. So we have a scheduled value that we can put together, which is G703, the schedule of values. It's going to fill in column B, I believe. But this doesn't help us actually apply for payment. And in order to apply for payment, we have to set up invoices in QuickBooks as well. And ConstructionSuite, as we mentioned earlier, has an easy way to do this. You can come up to and create a QuickBooks invoice right here. I'm going to do this for all customer jobs because I want to go ahead and include that change order if it's important. And let's say that we're just going to invoice for the first 3 categories of work. We're done with framing. We're going to invoice all the way through framing. Haven't started on exterior windows and doors yet for whatever reason, but let's just go ahead with this for now. So there's our invoice for the primary project, and here's the invoice for the change order project. And all of this will now be available in, oh, it looks like we've got invoices for another change order as well. All of this information is going to be available now in QuickBooks for the invoices. And when we want to draw out the application for payment on this, we'll come up to the application for payment section and generate a new app for pay. As we go through this wizard for generating the application for payment, it's going to give us a lot of the key details for the job, like which application number we're on. This is number 1, so we'll just go with it as such. The contract date, let's say that we sign the contract on the 2nd. You can put that in here. There's going to be areas in here where you can print onto a blank sheet of paper. If your printer has just normal blank printer paper in there, then you want to print it to a blank paper. If you actually have the AIA forms that you want to print onto, however, you can use the second option. There's also going to be some additional details here for things like the client, the owner, the architect, stuff like that. So we'll click next because we've got all the information that we need. And now we get to go through and start selecting the invoices that we want to use on this particular application for payment. I'm just going to use the first 2 because I haven't actually technically accepted change order number 2 yet, but I have accepted change order 1, and we're good. Now is where we can actually indicate that I've accepted change order number 1, and it needs to be put onto this billing period. Maybe change order number 2, which is marked as accepted right now as well, actually is going to be starting in the next billing period, so I'll leave that one off on this app for pay. At the materials stored to date section, you can actually go in there and say that we have ordered materials and we don't need them delivered to the job site yet. So they're in storage perhaps or something like that. So you can go ahead and put in those dollar amounts here and they will show up on the app for payment as well. And here on the next page, we can view a copy of that app for pay, and it opens the information up in QuickBooks. So this is the G702 form where it actually shows what our contract value is, what our change order additions are going to cause, how much we're invoicing for this period, the schedule of values, which was automatically created over here on the side, is going to give me a full listing of all the items available on the estimate, in alphabetical order in this case. And it's going to show me what we billed for this period, and as we start to move from job to job, you'll also see what they've billed for previous periods as well, on previous applications. So, looks like it was column C is the scheduled value, again populated from estimates that are in QuickBooks. Previous application is going to be populated by invoices that were already used on older app for pays. This period, of course, is going to be this one. We've got the materials stored. You'll see those numbers here. And then it goes through total completed and stored to date. As you could guess, it's just going to be the sum of these 3 columns. And then we've got a balance to finish and retainage for those of you who have to withhold retainage as well. This you'll see in a few different sheets because the schedule of values typically gets rather large, and it'll give you a running total down here at the bottom as well so that you can keep up with that also. With all this information coming in and showing up like so, you'll be able to gather up all the details for this and then just send it off to the bank relatively easily. The nice thing about that is once this gets to the bank and you click finish and it'll save it in there, they will now have on record everything that you guys wish to be billing for this period, and a lot of them will require that before they will release payment. Your clients may require something similar, especially for those of you who do large-scale commercial projects, or if you work with architects on large residential projects. I typically see a lot of people requiring those as well. So you're providing all the tools, and it takes very little additional time on your part to put these things together. You just got to make sure that your invoices are in there and available. But once that's done, you can send these off and get paid. Again, most important part, get paid. Everybody loves that part. It's going to make everybody happy, and this application for payment process makes it so that you can get paid with little to no pain involved. And there we go. Now we have an app for pay. So again, that application for payment, that's available for most of you in the, I believe it's going to be the corporate or Catalyst versions of ConstructionSuite and above. For most of the QuickBooks integration, of course, you're not going to see this until you get up to the Pro or Contractor version, Contractor on the commercial side, Pro on the residential side. That's where most of these things are going to take place. And the change order management, of course, becomes available when you get into Premier or Catalyst and above. And I believe that the work in progress is going to show up with that Premier Catalyst versions as well. So you'll see that coming in there as also. And at this point, we've actually wrapped most of the information that we need to cover for QuickBooks integration today. As I mentioned, most of this is going to be taking place from the estimates themselves. And it's always important to make sure that you're using the primary estimate for your job. If you ever switch away from the primary estimate, then your numbers are going to be a little bit off or skewed in some way. So make sure that you only ever try the QuickBooks integration from the primary estimates, and I think that you should be indicated many times if that's not the case. So it'll help keep you on task for there and should keep you guys moving forward at a great rate. Once again, this is going to be I think this is going to complete what we have for you today. I will be sticking around to answer any additional questions that you guys might have as we're going through the wrap-up process. For those of you who don't have any additional questions, though, once again, my name is Ian Schaefer. I'm here with UDA Technologies. We've just completed the QuickBooks integration webinar. Thank you for joining me today. It was a pleasure having you, and I hope all of you guys have a wonderful afternoon.